Hey everyone, JP here. Welcome to the channel. I have some great news to share with you guys today as the Ecodiesel finally has official specs revealed. I do want to note, however, that these specs are for the Ram 1500, but I don't expect these performance specs to change when the Ecodiesel finds its way into the Wrangler and the Gladiator. Alright, so the official specs of the updated EcoBoost. So the official specs of the updated Ecodiesel are 260 horsepower at 3600 RPM and 480 torque at 1600 RPM. This is a pretty big change over the previous Ecodiesel, as that engine was rated at 240 horsepower and 420 torque. So this is a nice update to that existing engine, and they have changed some things with it. The engine is now using a larger turbocharger. It's operating under a higher fuel pressure. It's using a CGI compacted granite iron block, and what else? They changed something else. They changed the compression ratio a little bit on it, and they did a few different things. So it's obviously, as with most diesels from OEMs, they didn't just change the tune on it. They did a lot of noteworthy updates to the engine. So again, I want to note that these are for the Ram 1500, but I really don't expect these specs to change, and the biggest reason for that is the fact that the Ecodiesel was used in the Grand Cherokee and the Ram 1500 previously, and it carried the same horsepower and torque numbers for both of those vehicles. So I would expect that for both the JL and the JT that these power numbers will remain the same. The new power numbers, that is. So what's so exciting about a diesel and a Wrangler? First off, here in the United States, we haven't had the luxury of a diesel Wrangler, so this will be a first for us. So aside from this being a first for Wranglers in the United States, one of the big benefits of diesels is fuel economy, especially when you're looking at smaller diesels. They typically give good fuel economy. I believe the Ram previously was rated at like 28, 29 highway MPG, which is pretty incredible for a full-size truck. And for instance, the current F-150 and its 3-liter diesel, I think in two-wheel drive it's like 30 highway, and for whatever reason in four-wheel drive models it's like 25 or something like that. So when you're talking diesels, especially light-duty diesels, you're really talking fuel economy. Now another thing that comes with diesels in general is good torque numbers, and the light-duty diesels are no exception to that. They have, especially this updated Ecodiesel, a whopping 480 torque is quite exceptional. Another positive thing to diesels is the fact that they generally have better longevity. This isn't always the case, but the previous Ecodiesel has shown to be a pretty good engine longevity wise. I think there's some timing chain issues that appear much later on in the life cycle for the engine, but aside from that, things are looking pretty good in the limited amount of time that they were in the 4th gen Ram. Another thing that's pretty cool about diesels, and this may or may not be of interest to you, but they sound pretty cool, and especially in something like a Jeep where you're out crawling on a trail or something like that, diesels just have a nice, unique, and like calm sound to them. I also think that a diesel Wrangler is probably a good way to go if you want to avoid the temptation of a V8 swap. Now granted, a V8 is a whole different horsepower territory, but at least you can get big torque figures, good fuel efficiency, and a unique experience that we haven't really had in factory Wranglers in the US anyways. Another good thing about diesels and Wranglers would be, especially this diesel with the giant torque figure that it has and the reasonable horsepower figure as well, you could more than likely, if they keep the gearing, the axle gears the same as the gas options, which they more than likely will, the 410 gears, for instance, in a Rubicon could easily continue to turn 38-inch tires, maybe even 40-inch tires, especially thanks to the 8-speed transmission. There's actually a lot of people that are currently rocking JLs, and probably not as many people rocking JTs just yet anyways. But a lot of them have been running 37, 38-inch tires with little to no issue with 410 gears, and that's thanks to the newer 8-speed transmission that found its way into the Wrangler. So I really think that between a 410 axle gear, the 8-speed transmission, and the monster torque that you get out of the diesel, I don't think that keeping the 410 gears with big tires would be an issue. Now, one of the last major things I want to hit on when it comes to this 3-liter Ecodiesel going in both the JL and the JT, this might actually be more important to the JT specifically, the Gladiator that is. If you compare these power figures to the Colorado and the Canyon 2.8 liter Duramax, they completely blow that engine out of the water, because that engine is rated at 181 horsepower and 369 torque, and you're talking like 100 more torque at a lower RPM than what the 2.8 liter Duramax is rated at, and you're also talking another 80 horsepower. So Gladiator owners of the 3-liter diesel should expect quite a bit more power than those driving, a ZR2 or any Colorado for that matter that has the 3-liter diesel. Another advantage that the Gladiator will have over the GM midsize trucks is the 8-speed transmission. The GM Colorado and Canyon currently only come with a 6-speed transmission, which is mostly fine for the diesel, but you really can't argue with the benefits that come with an 8-speed transmission. I suspect that'll probably change in the future. GM still seems to be kind of transitioning some of their powertrains and all that, and they're also probably trying to get their money's worth out of their 8-speed, but eventually I would expect the 10-speed to make its way into the GM midsize trucks as well. Alright, so let's talk about some of the things that are not so exciting about the diesel. One of the number one drawbacks to the diesel in something like the Wrangler or the Gladiator is probably the price. We don't have any official figures when it comes to the diesel in the Wrangler and the Gladiator, but I would expect that it would cost a good $4,000 approximately over the Pentastar V6. $4,000, maybe to some people $4,000 isn't much, but $4,000 is a decent increase when you're talking one engine versus another, and there are pros and cons, of course, to both. Another drawback to the diesel would be, you do have to use the diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, and if you get it at a pump, it's not really too costly. If you don't get it at a pump, it can be quite costly. It's just one of those things you got to deal with when you own a modern diesel and you don't tamper with the emissions. Along with that, you also usually have increased costs in oil changes, but to me, the oil changes are kind of a wash, but generally they are more expensive than when you compare them to a gas engine in the same vehicle. Another drawback to the light duty diesel is the aftermarket is not going to probably support it right out of the gate, and it might even take some time for them to support it after, because FCA is usually locking down the ECUs pretty good on those vehicles, but we'll just have to wait and see what that looks like. One thing you probably just want to keep in mind if you do get a diesel Wrangler when they come out is you're not going to have any aftermarket support out of the gate, and maybe the best thing that you have is like a throttle sensitivity adjustment or something like that. But as far as actual tuning goes, I would expect that to take some time. Whereas if you're getting a 3.6 liter Pentastar, there's some options right out of the gate with that, and there's even like supercharging and turbocharging options as well. And ultimately you can take that out and throw in a Hemi or an LS or LT as well. So to wrap that up for the cons, I really just think it comes down to the added cost of the diesel. Some of that, of course, you'll recoup in the fuel economy, and it is what it is. Diesels are more expensive than gas engines, and they've been that way for a while. I need to hit on fuel economy just a little bit more for the diesel, because I really think that the 3-liter Ecodiesel should be putting down some good fuel economy numbers for the Wrangler. It's definitely not unheard of once you put 37-inch tires in a lift or even go bigger than that to get like 14 miles to the gallon with your Pentastar. And some people might be in a hurry to argue that, but in general, a lot of people are getting like low teens when they put big tires on their Pentastar, or any gas engine for that matter. So really, I would expect that, or at least hope that with the Ecodiesel, you could hopefully achieve, let's say, 20 miles to the gallon on the highway with like 37, 38 inch tires, maybe even bigger. We'll just have to really wait and see. And I think tuning, of course, and for those that will probably emissions delete these things, there will probably be even more fuel economy there. But as far as OE, I wouldn't expect the Wrangler to pull off a 30 mpg stock highway rating. I bet it'll be more like, I don't know, 25 to 27 or something on the highway probably, and with decent city rating as well. And I really don't think that it's out of the picture to be able to achieve about 20 mpg or so with large tires and a lift kit, which to me that would be great. That would greatly increase the range of the Wrangler, would reduce fill ups, and ultimately reduce fuel costs. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So what are my thoughts on the diesel Wrangler as far as buying one for myself? Personally, ever since they mentioned the diesel coming in the JL, that has excited me. I think that that's going to be a great addition. Jeep refuses to give us a V8 from the factory, so I guess the next best thing will be able to have a diesel offering from the factory. And for me personally, I'm really interested in, we're just a family of 3, but I'm interested in building another 4-door maybe at some point. And I would really like this to be my family adventure vehicle and off-roader. And I think the diesel would really line up with that well, because we would just have better range on trips, better fuel economy overall, and hopefully it comes with better longevity as well. I think that if I got a diesel JL, this would also remove the temptation of putting a V8 in a JL for me, and that would just save me a lot of money in the long run. I can have decent power and torque figures, reasonable fuel economy, and shouldn't have too much issue turning larger tires. Now, one thing that does concern me about the diesel and the Wrangler is I have drove a couple different Ecodiesel 4th gen Rams in the past, and I just wasn't too thrilled with that engine in the Ram anyways. And that's because I drive a Ram with a Hemi in it, and I really like the power, and it's just hard to argue with 400 horsepower when the 4th gen Ram Ecodiesel only had 240 horsepower. Like, it really didn't matter to me that diesel put out just a little bit more torque than the Hemi, when the Hemi put out vastly more horsepower. And a lot of people get excited about torque figures, and torque does matter, but horsepower ultimately is what gets you moving and what gets you moving quickly. So it's really hard to argue with horsepower. Horsepower is the most exciting, honestly. But I think in normal daily driving and turning bigger tires, the large torque figure of a diesel will be quite handy. And really, I'm just going to have to get some time behind the wheel on a diesel Wrangler and see just how it acts from the factory, because it's ultimately going to stay stock for a good amount of time. So the other thing that I didn't like about the early Ecodiesel in the 4th gen Ram was it was just terrible off the line. There was just like, the throttle input was really weird. You'd hit the throttle and it would start, there was just so much turbo lag and so much delay off the line. It was just something I didn't want to deal with, especially when the Hemi it gets up and moves off the line, and it's just more exciting to drive. So fuel economy wasn't the end all for me, and in the Ram I'm happy to have the Hemi. Now, with that being said, the updated Ecodiesel with the changes that they've made, I think there's a chance that it might perform better off the line. It might be more enjoyable to drive. It's also going to be in a different size of vehicle, and there is no Hemi option in the Wrangler, so really you're looking at 260 horsepower versus 265 285 that the Pentastar has. and the diesel has a lot more torque. So I think it's a lot more at home in something like the Wrangler and isn't as overshadowed in the horsepower department. So I think overall it's just going to be a good way to go in that vehicle. But we're just going to have to wait and see. But one thing is for sure, overall, I'm definitely excited about the diesel coming to the Wrangler. I cannot wait to get my hands on one. I can't wait to test drive one. And I think it's going to be really difficult for me to avoid purchasing a JLU diesel. But we're just going to have to see when the time comes. The last news that I saw on the JL diesel is that we should be seeing it before the end of this year. You know, don't hold me to that. That was the last thing I saw from Jeep representatives when they were talking about the Gladiator. They talked about the diesel coming to the JL and the Gladiator and kind of the time frame that we would see on that. And you know, it's just going to be up to them on when they can get it to market and how long it takes them to get through emissions, because GM actually had to push back their light duty diesel in the Silverado because of the time it's taking them to get through emissions testing. Alright guys, so that's about it for the Wrangler part of this video. I do want to go ahead, since we're on the topic of light duty diesels, I do want to go ahead and discuss light duty diesels in the half-ton trucks and what that's currently looking like. So Ford, Ram, and GM are all going to have light duties. Should be by the end of this year. Actually, GM 2020 model, so might be beginning of 2020. We'll just have to see. Ford already has their 3-liter Power Stroke out, and you know, it's pretty decent. It's 250 horsepower, 440 torque. It, you know, it has better power figures than the first gen Ecodiesel and the Ram, but you know, nothing mind-blowing. It's like 10 more horsepower and 20 more torque, so take it for what you will. From the testing I've seen, I've actually haven't driven one of those trucks, but from the testing I've seen, they look just as slow as the Ecodiesel was, and just not as exciting to drive. You know, they do seem to have reasonable torque, and you know, just okay for people that aren't too crazy about horsepower and really want to lean more towards fuel economy. That engine does run about $4,000 over the 5-liter. It currently is only available in the Lariat and up, but from the information I'm seeing, it's going to be available in the XLT and up starting very soon. And that would make sense because the new 3-liter Duramax is also going to be offered in the LT and RST and up. So it would make sense for Ford to finally offer that engine in the XLT and up, as well, as I imagine the XLT is higher volume as far as sales anyways. And so let's go ahead and talk about the new GM 3-liter Duramax. To me, this engine is very appealing. It's 277 horsepower, 460 torque. I think it strikes a good balance between the Ecodiesel and the Power Stroke. I really like that it has more horsepower. Like I said when I was talking about how the Ecodiesel performed in the Ram, it was just kind of sluggish and the power wasn't really great. And we're not talking a huge power increase with this 3-liter Duramax. You know, that's like almost 40 horsepower over the first gen Ecodiesel. But I think, you know, the more horsepower you can get in an engine like that, especially for a half-ton truck, I think it's going to be the better. I'd really like to see these light duty diesels, instead of so much on the torque end of things, I'd really like to see bigger horsepower bumps. I'd really like to see like a minimum of 300 horsepower to make the vehicle just more enjoyable to drive on the daily. Personally, I think the Silverado 1500 with the 3-liter Duramax is going to be one of the quicker light duty diesels on the road, just because of the power figures, and it's a comparatively lightweight truck to the F-150. It's pretty, you know, it's pretty close to the F-150, and you know, it's lighter than the Ram, and you know, ultimately it's packing more horsepower, and they all have pretty comparable transmissions. You know, the Ford and GM are both rocking 10 speeds, and the Ram the 8-speed. I don't think that the transmissions, you know, there's not enough difference between an 8-speed and a 10-speed for that to be much of an issue. So ultimately, I would expect that the GM truck will be the quicker of the trucks, and it will be interesting to see how well they all pull versus each other, how well their fuel economy is, and you know, just overall driving experience with those vehicles. As it stands now, though, I've never personally towed a whole bunch of weight with a light duty diesel, But all the towing tests I've ever seen, these 3-liter diesels really struggle, and ultimately they're not meant to be the pulling engine of choice. They're meant to be a fuel economy engine with less compromise, and that meaning that they still have strong torque compared to something like a base V6, non-turbo gas engine, where you're getting arguably better gas mileage. You don't have very much torque, you don't have much pulling capability. These diesels kind of hit the meat of the half-ton towing segment, so they usually can tow somewhere around 7,000 pounds pretty well, even though some of them, as you will see, will be rated higher. Like I think Ram's rating a specific model with the new Ecodiesel at like 12,500 pounds, and I think that's just a lot for that engine. Probably doable, but not in the most extreme of conditions, of course. I wouldn't want to do TFL's Ike challenge with that setup personally, but I really think that it's nice that we're seeing more light duty diesel options. I think it's a harder buy in a half-ton truck, but I really think it's going to be an excellent buy in the Wrangler and the Gladiator, and especially if you're cross-shopping a diesel Colorado to a Gladiator, you're going to pay more overall for a Gladiator, but you're going to get a hell of a package. The diesel is going to be a lot more stout, if it keeps these same specs, which I wouldn't expect it to go any less, combined with the 8-speed transmission with the diesel as well. I just think that there's a lot of advantage going towards the Gladiator, and ultimately the main thing that's going to be against it is going to be price. So I think it's great that we have a lot of light duty options coming for the half-ton trucks. For me personally, I think they're kind of a hard buy, and the reason for that is usually they cost more than gas engines that are more fun to drive, like the V8 options, especially when you consider that the 3-liter Duramax will be the same cost as the 6.2-liter V8 in the GM trucks. It's really hard to pick. I mean, you're really picking. Both of those engines are rated at the same torque figure as well. Granted at different RPMs, but the 6.2 is definitely a torquey engine, and it has gobs of horsepower compared to the diesel. I mean, one's just exciting to drive, and one is okay, and it's better on gas. So you really got to kind of pick what direction you want. Really, all that horsepower also helps with towing. So to me, I still lean toward gas engines in half-ton trucks, but I really find myself leaning toward the diesel and the Wrangler. And ultimately I just think it's going to be a good engine for that. And another thing I'm kind of anxious to see on the 3-liter Duramax is how quickly the aftermarket will catch up and allow tuning on that engine, because I think tuning these light duty diesels is really where it's going to be at. I mean, if you can get into like the mid 300s, maybe even higher on the horsepower, and of course you'll get a bump of torque with that, but getting the horsepower into like the mid 3s would really wake up those diesels and make them more enjoyable to drive on the daily, unless you're just a slow driver anyways and it doesn't matter. But every now and then it's just nice to get moving without having to floor the vehicle, or just always push it to the limit to get going. And sometimes it's nice to just accelerate faster than you need to because it's fun. So but that's my take on the light duty diesels, guys. I'm very excited for the diesel and the Wrangler. I'm on the fence about diesels in half-ton trucks currently. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up, please. If you want to see more from JP, hit subscribe. And until the next video, guys, I'll see you around.